We probably should have made the civil rights its own unit, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't do that. So here we are. Okay, so let's call this the space race. Big number Y,
Why?
Z,
Why?
as in Y-O-Y. Why bother going to space?
Ha.
All right, so we're going back in time a little bit. Back in time, 1957. So this is, to sync it up in your brains, this is lined up with Brown versus the Board of Education. Okay, so same time period, right? So we're going back in the 1950s. Eisenhower's president. The United States is dealing with the fact that the Soviets have their first nuclear weapons. The UK, France, right? The world is starting to get more nuclear weapons, and the Soviet Union has tested its first hydrogen bomb. Okay, and so we're dealing with this back and forth, where the U.S., the Soviet Union, China, France, and England are all dropping nukes all the time, right? We're dropping nukes like seriously, we're dropping nukes like testing nukes. We're testing them like 1 or 2 a week, basically around the whole world. Okay, and so and these bombs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the Soviets dropped something called the Tsar Bomba, and Tsar Bomba is so large that it actually registers as an earthquake in the United States when they bomb it. Yeah, it's so big. Yeah,
I mean,
it's something like 500,000 times larger than the Hiroshima bomb.
I have to say bombs are bad, but that's kind of cool that we are able to make something so big that it causes an earthquake on the other
I guess
side of the earth.
the Tsar Bomba is so big that when they drop it, you can actually measure the difference in the wobbling of the Earth, of the orbit, the angle of the orbit of the planet.
That's so cool. I'm not like a terrorist, I
I
promise.
mean, it's kind of cool, except for that,
It's a bomb.
you like destroy the entire planet and kill all life.
But it's still cool that we've been able to make something that you can like measure the wiggle of the axis moving and an earthquake.
Well, I tell
It's
you
kind
who didn't think it was cool? Americans in the 1950s. Americans thought
of,
that it was profoundly not cool, right? Because the Soviets were doing it, right? Um, then Americans get the scariest thing they've ever heard in their entire life. On October 4th, 1957, Americans turn on their radios and they hear beep, 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 beep. The scariest thing they've ever heard in their life. It's Sputnik. The Soviets have launched the first artificial satellite into space. And this is a picture of Sputnik right here. This is what Sputnik looks like. It's the first man-made object in space. And they put it into an orbit where it crosses around the Earth about 4 times before it just burns up in the atmosphere. Okay, this thing is about as big as like a beach ball, maybe. It's about as big as a beach ball, and these legs, these antennas, are about 3 feet long.
how did it get into space?
It was attached to a big giant rocket, and then when it shot up, the rocket just launched it off the top,
Mhm.
and then the rocket fell down and burned in the atmosphere.
It just went into orbit.
Yeah, and then it was in orbit, and it couldn't really do anything. All it could do was just transmit a beep, just beep, 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 and then it would bounce off of relay stations on the Earth, and based on where you're picking up the signal on the Earth, you do what's called triangulation. So I pick it up from here, I pick it up from here, I figure out the angle of those, I figure out the angle of the transmission, and then based on the angle of the transmission, I can tell where it was at the time of the transmission, right? And then I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again, right? And so by doing that, you can measure its pathway across the Earth. Okay? The Soviets purposely put it on a pathway where it crosses over the United States 4 times, where it flies right over the center of the United States, right? And Americans are freaked out because if the Soviets can put this in space, then the Soviets can put a bomb in space.
Has
Right?
a bomb ever been put into space,
No, not
or
the.
would it even work?
So we do have. Okay, no, that's not true. So we do have what's called intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and the way an intercontinental ballistic missile works is the missile actually launches into space, it goes into orbit, and then it re-enters the atmosphere.
Oh.
Yeah. And we have never dropped one on a country. I'm trying to think if we have. We might have dropped them in Iraq. I don't think we have. Because I think those ones were shorter missile ones. But we have like launched up and then hit targets in the ocean and stuff. Yeah, we've practiced and done that. And the Soviets did the same thing too, where they were able to launch it from Moscow or from somewhere in, near Moscow, and then hit a target in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Right? I mean, you don't have to be perfect. You're not hitting like a little X, right? It only has to be city size, right? And so you have like a 100 square mile block in the ocean where you are hitting in the ocean, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? When you're dropping a Tsar Bomba on New York, it doesn't really matter if you hit 15th Street or 20th Street or 100th Avenue, right? Because
It's
it's
so
all
big.
gone. It's all just dead, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Americans flip out. They are insanely freaked out by this. Okay, the United States, as a response, creates NASA, the National Air and Space, or no, what is it? National Air and Space Association. Isn't it? Aeronautical Space. What the hell
I
does
think it
NASA
is.
stand for? Air and
I
Space.
feel
Let's
like
see.
it's definitely like
Agent.
an AR word where it's like
It's got to be
I just
agent.
completely forgot
What the
English.
heck is NASA?
Okay. National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. There we go. Cool.
Aeronautics.
Aeronautics and Space Administration, not agency,
Mhm.
administration. All right.
Agency.
All right. Here's the problem, though. The Soviets, if you look at this timeline, the Soviets start beating us on every single thing that we try to do. Okay? Because in October, they launched Sputnik. In November, they launched Sputnik 2. And Sputnik is just it's the Russian word for satellite. They just call it satellite. The first
What
satellite
the
was
difference
named.
between the first Sputnik and Sputnik 2?
So this is Sputnik 1, and then Sputnik 2 is the one that has a passenger. Okay. So Sputnik 1 is just this thing to see if you can get into space. Sputnik 2 is to see if you can have something alive in space. Okay. So, and the word Sputnik just means satellite. So they call it Satellite 1, Satellite 2. So Laika here becomes the first living thing in space. Her name is Laika. And she's a dog, obviously. She was a stray dog picked up in Moscow. And Soviet scientists basically said that, if a dog can survive being a stray in Moscow, then it's tough enough to survive anything, if it can survive Russian winters. And the word Laika means yappy dog, like a dog that barks. So the first dog was named Dog, and it was launched on a vessel called Satellite. The Russians aren't very good at naming things.
Dog.
They named it Dog, and they put it on Satellite, right? The first spaceship is called Ship. Yep. The first space station is called Station. Yeah. Yeah, the Russians don't have a lot of pizzazz in naming things. Anyway, Laika becomes the first and only living thing sent into space for the purpose of dying. The Russians had no way of bringing her home at all. They knew she was going to die up there, and they sent her up there just to see if she could survive.
Yeah,
And
because they didn't have a way to get it back, right?
they had no way to get it back, right? They didn't even know if it was possible. They didn't have a way of getting it back. And so she becomes the first thing sent into space to die. And it works. She goes up into space, and they can hear her whimpering and kind of yelping over the microphone. And so they all say, hey, things can survive. She lives in space for about 6 minutes or so before burning up in the atmosphere. Now, Americans are really, really freaked out because now the Russians have put a satellite into space and a dog into space, and
They're gonna
Americans haven't done anything.
transport the Russians.
And we haven't done anything, right? By the time we get our first satellite into space, the Russians put their first human in space. Now they send up a couple other ones. They send up another dog named Strela, and that means arrowhead because she's got a little like arrowhead pattern on her forehead. They send her up, and she dies in space too. But they tried to recover her. They tried to they were trying to bring her back, and failed. But the first man in space, the first human in space, is Yuri Gagarin right here, and he goes up in space in 1961. Okay, and if you look at our timeline here, by 1961, they beat us by a month. So we have the first satellites and first all this other stuff that we're getting up here, right? So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We're getting all these things going up. Okay. Yuri Gagarin's the first human in space. Alan Shepard is the first American in space. The US, we didn't launch dogs. We decided to launch chimpanzees first because we said chimpanzees felt more human-like. Here's Alan Shepard. He's the first American in space.
Is that really why we sent the chimpanzees? Just because they're
They're
more
more-
related to humans?
Yeah, they're more human. They're smarter. They're more human, right? Because the idea was that if you can send a chimpanzee up, that you can use the same kind of like harnesses and suits and things, right? You just have to make it bigger for humans. You know what I mean? Like we were trying to cut down on the designs. Yeah, basically. Well, we already knew a dog could survive, right? So if a dog can survive, a chimp can survive, right? Where I don't want any of this crap. I don't want any of this crap. Okay. Let's go to here. All right, so here are some examples of the space race. The US sends up Tyros 1. This becomes the very first weather satellite in the world. The first weather satellite where it's measuring like humidity and air pressure and stuff, and it's sending back information. We also send up our first GPS satellite. This is where Americans are going to invent the GPS in the 1960s. For the first time, we're going to be able to bounce signals off of satellites, and using triangulation, you can locate things on the Earth, like your car or your iPhone, right? Eventually, this technology is going to get put into phones and things, right? But in the beginning, we're using it on like planes, so we can track planes over the ocean and stuff.
So how big is Tyros?
Tyros is pretty big. It's about 6 feet in diameter, six or 7 feet in diameter.
Oh.
Right. But it's pretty interesting because it's one of the first things that has like built-in solar panels and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be completely powered by solar energy, and even from the very early days of the space race, we were looking at ways to make the space race economically viable and stuff, right? This is kind of a big difference between the Russians, the way the Russians do things, and the way that the Americans do things. Is the Russians are doing things for like military purposes primarily, and as like propaganda to show the greatness of the Soviet Union. And the United States has some military stuff and some propaganda, but very early the Americans are looking at ways to make money off of it. Very early, right? And they don't have cell phones yet, obviously, but they're thinking about cell phones, and they're thinking about how to send lasers back down and stuff like that, right? Eventually the United States is going to, I don't have a slide for it, but eventually the United States will put a man on the moon, and we will successfully put the first man on the moon in 1969. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin get on the moon. One small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. we'll do this a little bit later in the year where we're going to talk about the economics of the space race. Because for a lot of students, they think a lot of students don't really get into space anymore because it kind of feels like we don't really have to go there, right? And so lots of people think that things like the moon landing are just a waste of money, right? And maybe, yeah, putting a dude on the moon costs a lot of money, right? But the difference is that in order to put the guy on the moon, you have to invent all sorts of stuff, right? You have to invent computers and the internet and satellites and lasers and, you know, like radio location signals. And you have to invent all these things. And
Mhm.
whenever NASA invents something, the US government has a policy that anything invented by the US government is property of the US people, of the American people. And so the US government gives it to the American people. And so when they create like GPS systems, right? The Air Force creates the GPS where you locate things using satellites, right? And the Air Force just gives it to American businesses. And American businesses turn it into GPSs. They turn it into cell phones. They turn it into, you know, all these other things. And so what ends up happening is a lot of American companies end up making a ton of money because that really, really expensive development stage was all paid for by taxpayers. And so the companies don't have to pay for that really expensive thing, right? Like think of how much money the internet makes. And the internet was made because of the space race, because we needed a way to send information to space. And that's what the internet's all about, right? And now the internet is worth like whatever, 11 cajillion dollars, right? Like I don't
Everything.
yeah, the internet by itself is like the third richest country on the planet Earth. Something like that, you know? I don't know, I'm making that number up, but you get the point, right?
Richest country.
Yeah, it would be. If the internet was a country, it would be a worst country in the world, man. Have you ever read the YouTube comment section? I don't want a country like that. The sad truth is that already is our country, right? Ooh, all right. All right, we're gonna leave it there. We'll have a nice short one because you know I'm a big doofus and I don't know how to tell time. So, but that's
Thank
okay. All right.